What's up, John Morris here, johnmorrisonline.com. Welcome back to another episode of the John Morris Show. So, one funny thing I learned before I get into today's episode, in the old Discord channel today, apparently that little intro is the thing. I had somebody come in there and, hey, you're the John Morris. Tell me they've heard it about 100 times. So, I thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, this episode, we're going to get back to our e-commerce script tutorial. This one, where we left off, we had all of our data that was available now to our templates. So we're going to start actually building our template pages, and we're going to be using Bootstrap to do that. Of course, that's not a requirement, but I happen to believe that it helps ease some of the coding that you need to do in order to kind of put all this together. So I'm going to be using Bootstrap. I'm going to walk through that and actually start building these pages here. So this is going to be, we're kind of moving now from the back end because we've got most of that pretty much in place. There'll be probably a few tweaks there. Now we're moving to the front end and we're going to actually start making our pages and hooking everything up and all that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to be getting into in today's video. So with that said, let's jump right in.
So I want to start off by just going through where we're actually at, and then I can show you kind of how all of this has come together. So here we are on the home page of our site. You can see now we have some products listed here, the products that we have in our database. You can see we have a little bit of a site title here. Now, I'm using Bootstrap for this, and I'm using just the blog kind of default template that they have over there. Obviously, you can change this and use, whatever you would like for this, but I just wanted to keep it simple and show you how to actually put this into a template. So we've got our site title, our site description. You can see we got some title tag that has that same thing. If we click over into a product, you can see now we have product one, we have a thumbnail or an image, we have a description, we have a price, all that matches what's in our query up here. And then if we look at the title tags up here, we have this product one for our title tag. So we're getting what we should be getting on this page. If we click to about, now you can see again, title tag up here says about, we have about, this is the about page. So we're getting what we're supposed to get here. And if we just type in some gibberish and go to the 404 page not found, looks like the page doesn't exist, 404 page not found. So every one of our pages, we're getting the data that we're supposed to be getting for those pages. They're being displayed correctly. It's being pulled from our database. So we've kind of got all of the template parts kind of hooked up here for a basic display of data. So with that said, let's go ahead and look at the actual code to kind of make all this happen. One of the first things that we'll want to look at is we have added to our database this thumbnail column. So we have these thumbnails. We've added this thumbnail column here. Now you can delete your entire table and add this line in for your install script and rerun your install script if you want, or you can just run alter table and you can actually just add this to what you have now. Now, I'm going to leave that for you as a challenge for you to kind of figure out how to do that, how to add a column to an existing table that already has data in it, and then how to add the data for each row that you need for that. I think that would be a good challenge for you, so I'm going to leave that for you to kind of figure out. Not too difficult, really. Right, so that's the install script that has changed. I'm just going to kind of walk through all the files that have changed and show you what's changed and to give you a good idea of what's going on. So the install script has changed. Then we have the config file. So we've added a couple things. We have site URL, site title, and site description. The last two are pretty self-explanatory. I've done this a lot of times in a lot of different ways, and I've done stuff programmatically to get the URL and all this sort of thing, and I've never really found a huge benefit of doing it that way. I feel like I'm kind of at the point where I feel like just hard coding into the config file just is the kind of the simplest way to do it, and there's not much benefit, at least for me, of going through everything you need to do to try and to figure out the URL programmatically. So I just hard coded in there, and we're going to use this in our we're going to have a function that we're going to use this in, because now we're starting to include image files and CSS files, and we need an absolute I like best having an absolute path from which to reference all of that stuff. So this is going to give us a base that we can write a function off of for it. Same with site title and site description. Of course, if you're doing different sites, you would of course change these. All right, next is our index.php, and so really the big thing that's changed here is we've added this template type variable. What this is used for, so right here I'm on the home page. If we inspect this, you can see what we're ultimately trying to get to is this body tag has a class of home. Okay, and if we go to, say, the about page, it has a class of page, and let's go back home, and let's go to one of these products, and you can see now it has a class of single. Okay, so what that allows us to do is now, because the body tag for these different template types have a class that references their template type, we can target those classes in our CSS file. So we can, maybe we want the title of the page, the individual product or whatever, to be different based off whether we're on a page, we're on a single product page, we're on the home page, etc. We can do that now because we have those class tags in the template type class in the body tag. So that's what this ultimately allows us to do. We need to talk about a function that helps us with that, but you can see here, basically every time that we have, we're including some sort of template. So we have include, we're adding template type as well. So include template type, include template type, include template type, all the way down. That's what we're doing. Last thing is you'll see here that I have template type equals page slug equals, which may look like it's bad syntax, and if you didn't mean to do it, it would be. But what this actually does is it just is going to set both of these variables equal to this value here. So it's just a little bit more concise way, since these, in a lot of these cases, are set to the exact same thing. All right, so that's the index file and the template kind of handler there on the index.php. Next is our functions. Now, I'm going to go through some of these, and some of these I'm going to go over quickly. You're going to have access to this source code. So some of this stuff is not really relevant to what we're doing for an e-commerce site. It's really something a little bit different, and frankly isn't necessarily something that at this point you really need to dive into much. It was more just about a certain way I wanted to do it. But that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the ones that are relevant. So we have this get site info function here, and the parameter is option, which is set by default equal to site URL. And so essentially the new constants that we added in our config file, this function allows us to grab those. So site title, site description, and site URL. So you just specify site title, site description. You could specify site URL, or that's what the default is here. And so it's going to return that result. So a simple switch statement there. Next is get permalink. Here's where we can pass in a slug. So for example, let's try header. And you can see here we have, that's not, actually it's going to be on the home page. So we have get permalink right here, and essentially what we're passing in is the product SKU. That's the slug for an individual page, because remember this is the URL. That's essentially what the slug is in this context. So essentially we can pass in the product SKU. We can pass in, say, about, which is the page slug for about. We could pass in 404 if we wanted. And what this function is going to do is essentially going to format that slug into a full absolute URL based off of our site info here. So based off what we specified for that site info constant in our config file. So That way we don't have to constantly format those URLs. We can just call get permalink. We can pass in the slug of the URL that we want, and it'll do it all for us. Next is get page title. So if we come over there to header, you see our title tags, and I was showing you the different title tags. We're calling get page title. This takes a little bit because sometimes we have a product, sometimes we have a page, sometimes we're on the home page, sometimes we're on the 404. We have to have the logic to figure out what title tag we're supposed to be displaying. So you can see again, this is a fairly standard just switch statement here, and this is where we're using template type. So I talked about how we specified template type in index.php. Here's where we're actually using it, and if that is set to single, then we know we're on a single product page, and so we're going to use the product name as our title tag. So that's why our product name shows up here in the title tag. If we're on a page, we're going to use the page title. If we're on 404, we're hard coding it. If we're under default, which is essentially the home page, then we're going to use our get info function to get the site title and the site description here. And we're going to pass that into a sprintf here like this, and we're going to return that title. So again, that's just a handler for getting the page title, and it's a pretty straightforward switch function there. All right, these last three then are the ones that I'm not necessarily going to dive into because we could literally spend hours doing this. I literally spent hours building these. But essentially the idea here is if we go to, well, let's go to the home page first. So, and actually let's come over here to our images folder here, and I'm going to delete some of these images. So let's go yes to all. So those images don't exist. Now if I go to the home page, we're displaying these images, and you can now see I have two new images, -240 by 141 on both 0001 and 0002. Okay, so essentially what these functions do, and actually let me just real quick, here's where we're calling get thumbnail URL. We're passing in the product, and then we're passing in a width and a height. And so essentially what these functions do is they take the product object here, and they are going to, so this is again based off you are working with a client who primarily manages their products via some sort of spreadsheet. And I've had this happen to me, and you have to try and transfer it to WordPress or WooCommerce. It's a real pain in the butt. So this script is designed specifically for that situation. So in that, you're then going to have, remember we created this thumbnail option in our database, this thumbnail column. In your spreadsheet, you're going to include a thumbnail column in your spreadsheet, and it's essentially going to be equal to the product SKU. Now maybe you could skip that part and do it programmatically, but if you, the nice thing about this is you don't have to use the product SKU. Right? If you wanted to change it up, you could. You'd have to change the code a little bit. If you wanted to use different names for your thumbnails, you could. But I'm just going based off product SKU to keep things simple. And so, so now we're specifying that image file name, not the full URL, just the file name of the image for each product under this thumbnail option right here, and we're uploading those with the same file name to our images folder. So now we can create a reference. And so essentially that's what this does is we get the thumbnail, what was specified as the thumbnail, and what we're doing is essentially we need a certain size. So we passed in on our homepage 240 by 141. Well, these thumbnails that I have in here are 1280 by 720, all of them. They're huge. Now, we're not going to squeeze them down to this size because loading those huge images would really hurt performance. Instead, what we want to do is we want to create thumbnails that are the right size for what we need. That's what these three functions do. Get thumbnail URL exists, and create thumbnail. So essentially, we're calling get thumbnail URL. This is kind of our controller function here, and it's going to check to see if we're going to create a URL that we need. So essentially, we're going to check and see first if we're on 001, for example, or we're loading 001 thumbnail, we're going to check and see if we have the 001-240 by 141, which again is what we specified, right? We're going to check and see if we have that. If we have it, well, we're just going to return, if that file exists, right? If that URL exists, we're just going to return it and specify, we know that it exists, so we're just going to return that URL, and that's what we're going to try and load. However, if it doesn't exist, then we're going to create it, and that's what create thumbnail does here. Now, this is a big old long function here, and the framework for this, I want to specify the framework for this is based off some code. I was researching this and how to do this, some code that was on Stack Overflow. Now, I've had to go through here and change a decent amount of this to fit what I'm doing here, but the basic framework and basic idea was from Stack Overflow. And so again, you're going to have access to this code. You can kind of look through it, but I don't want to get into this because we could spend the next hour just going over this one function. So I don't want to do that because it's not really necessary for the actual e-commerce what we're doing part here. But basic idea is that we're going to, again, when we call get thumbnail URL, we're going to see if we have that size already. If we don't, we're going to create it. And then from that point forward, whenever we run URL exists, it will return that, oh yeah, this does now exist. And so we'll just load it. So really it's the first time that you check for that size that it's going to have to create, and after that it won't. So not too bad. And then if we click on product 1, you can see now it creates a new one, 001-690 by 393. And that's what loads here. Okay, so that's what all of these different functions do. The last thing I'll say on those 3 functions is, this is one of the things we were talking about over on the Discord server about the difference between procedural and using object-oriented programming. And I am of the opinion that object-oriented programming isn't the right tool for every situation. It's the right tool for a lot of situations. It's probably the right tool for most situations, but it's not the right tool for every situation. And so sometimes trying to do everything using object-oriented programming, I know for me, I end up creating a lot of unnecessary overhead. I mean, a class with one method in it probably isn't necessarily the most efficient thing. And so I've learned for me to let the classes that I build into an application grow organically. And what that means is when I start out, I create a functions file just like I have here, this functions.php. And as I build the application, if I come across things where I'm starting to write a decent amount of code and I've got a number of functions that are all kind of designed around one thing to accomplish one thing, then that's to me a good candidate for a class, and I may take that code and then put it into a class and update the rest of my code to reference that class and so forth. So to me, and I would say for me, that is how I make the determination between procedural and using a class and object-oriented programming, is I let it kind of grow organically, and that keeps me from really getting lost in over-organizing my application. So I would say that this get thumbnail URL exists, create thumbnail, this whole routine would be a good candidate for a class. Now, I'm not going to do that here because I want to just keep moving forward, but that is something that, again, would be a good candidate for a class in my opinion. All right, so that's the functions file. Now let's go ahead and head on over to our template files. So you'll notice that we have template files. So for example, we now we had our home, we had our single, we had our page, we had our 404. Now we have a header, we have a footer, we have our style sheet, and we have our sidebar here. All right, so let's talk about the template files first. Header is a pretty standard header file. You can see here we're including our functions.php file, and all this HTML code is actually pretty much what was provided by Bootstrap. Okay, so if we look, we're actually we didn't even download Bootstrap, right? Right here we're using the CDN to load it. I like using the CDN because you get the browser cache, you get that kind of boost for your Bootstrap. Now I know this means I'm loading the whole thing and I don't get to customize exactly what's in it. I'm getting things I don't need. But I think when you trade that off with the fact that they probably already have this loaded in their browser and cached, it's debatable the performance hit or not hit, I think. So I just like doing it here. It's just a lot simpler that way. And so that's the way I do it. And then we have our own style sheet here, which we're using to kind of customize on top of Bootstrap. Again, this style sheet is the one that is actually provided. It's used in getbootstrap.com for this blog template example. So if you go to getbootstrap.com, you click on examples, one of them will be a blog template. If you click through to that and then you view the page source, you'll see that one of them is, I think it's blog.css. One of the CSS files that's being loaded is blog.css. I literally just grabbed that code from there, and that's what this is. The only thing I changed is some of these class names. This was blog pagination, blog, I think it was blog post, blog thumbnail, blog meta. I just changed it all to fit what we're doing here. I didn't have to do that, but I wanted to do that. So now this actually ties in and it uses products, it uses page instead of everything being blog. But in terms of the CSS, there's very little different here. All right, so again, we have our header.php file. You can see here, again, including our functions, we have our doc type, our HTML tag, we have our head tags here, so we're specifying our meta tags. This is basically the bare minimum. So you could probably say that this is pretty much required because it's the bare minimum you need. This viewport is for responsiveness, so you're getting that. We have our title tags. We're linking in Bootstrap. We're linking in our CSS file here. And then we have our body tag. This is where we're echoing our template type. You can see we're just echoing the template type. I mean, we probably could or should write a function that is get template type, just in case there's some, any sort of finagling we need to do later on. But for right now, we're just actually echoing the template type straight in here. All this code is from Bootstrap. So masthead container, we've got our navigation. You can see here we're calling get site info, and then just straight up here, and then get site info with about. We could use permalink here. So I think I may have written this before I wrote that permalink function. So we could go in and change that and to permalink instead. That would probably make a little bit more sense. And then we have here under our site header, which is this part right here, we have get site info, the site title, and site description. That's what populates this part right here. Okay. So that's the header. The footer.
All right, so that'll do it for today's episode. Again, thanks for watching. If you'd like to get access to the source code, you can do so as a member of the new, I've kind of branded this a little bit, the new Code Nation, which will give you access to not only the source code for this tutorial, it's going to give you access to all of my source code, all of the different tutorials and stuff that I had available, my PHP 101 course, my Lightning responsive course. Plus, you're going to get special access inside our community on our Discord server to things that regular members aren't going to be able to get access to, and all sorts of different perks like that. So if you want to get access to all that, head on over to codenation.co. It's not .com, it's .co, codenation.co, and you'll be able to get access to all of that stuff. Like I said, thanks for watching. If you like the video, be sure to like it, subscribe if you haven't, and we'll talk to you next time.